Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 102nd Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our discussion panels twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political discussion. Today, our panel will explore political correctness. What is it? What are its origins? Is it a good thing? Can it be a problem? And who's behind it? Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Jerry Ritzman, co-founder of Ritzman Pharmacies. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. And on his left is Patty Haskins, member of the Wadsworth City Council. Jerry, starting off with you. Attacking political correctness was a feature of Donald Trump's presidential campaign in 2016. What do you think he was actually attacking, and do you think it helped get him elected?
Well, let me reflect a little bit on political correctness, because I thought about that quite a bit this week as the topic came out, and I think, where did political correctness come from? What were the origins or the roots of it? And I was recently at the World War I museum in Kansas City. Spent an afternoon there and was looking at some of the posters that they had about things that were going on during the war and so forth. Mm-hmm. And some of the terms that were used were today be quite offensive.
Curl your hair.
Yes, what I have to curl it might have, but they were quite offensive, or would be offensive to most folks today, but they were accepted. And I had to think, and then couple.
Are you going to give some examples of those?
No, I am not. I'm not, because I can't remember them all, John, and or I would give examples of them. You know, the ones in World War II, there were ones there too that were not, even headlines, that would not now be at all accepted.
Yellow-bellied Japs.
Yes, things like that,
yeah.
Right. So I had to think, well, political correctness, did it come from accepted terms for people who were different or individuals who were minorities? And these were accepted terms that after a while had a derogatory tone to them, mm-hmm. or became the pejorative for that particular group. And maybe rightly so in some of those. And so those were not accepted anymore in, let's say, polite company. Mm-hmm. And so that was maybe the root of political correctness. But then it kind of morphed or expanded into other areas. Now we have safe spaces, and we have those whatever they complain about it.
Microaggressions.
Yeah, microaggressions and things like that. So it kind of ballooned from something that was derogatory to me or you or to whatever minority it was, into these micro and safe space. So
what are they exactly? Can you tell me that?
What's that?
What's a safe space?
Well, that's where I think it is a lot of times in universities, where you aren't going to hear any speech or talk that makes you uncomfortable, or that would seem aggressive to you, or it would seem make you uncomfortable. This is a safe space.
So a conservative could go to a safe space and not be called a neocon, or...
Well, right. Or they wouldn't have to listen to somebody who had a different opinion, mm-hmm. or a different idea that differed from theirs, because this having to listen to that is
so in a safe space
stressful.
You would have no insults for Donald Trump.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So so these accepted terms then became not accepted, but mm-hmm. then that kind of expanded. It could be for ethnicities, natural origins, occupations, all that type of thing, where it became an insult to be referred to with that particular term. Carrying it to the extreme, maybe I could become offended if someone didn't refer to me as a Western European American, instead of calling me a white person or a Caucasian. You know, maybe someday will be expanded to that. I don't know. So how it affected the election, and was Donald Trump using it? I don't know if he was or not. He could have been, but the thing was, I think that people were just fed up with the extreme that political correctness went to. And they says, come on, you know, you're afraid to call a spade, you have to use this term that is very bland.
That's not politically correct.
It isn't, I mean, in cards.
I've thought about that one.
That's not political correct. I don't know if it is or not, Ron. But, or call something what it is, but it became offensive or stressful for somebody to hear that. People were tired of all this tiptoeing around what things actually were, and I think that they had had it. And so he could have used that. That could have garnered him some support.
Let me give one example of what you're talking about.
Okay.
Okay, I just noticed this. The word saint, along with bishop, chapel, and Pentecost, have been removed from the Oxford University Press Dictionary because they're offensive. Now that's an extreme. Oh, you're talking about an extreme.
Yeah, I'm talking extreme.
Yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to toss that in, Ron.
Yeah.
Us being
And I may think of
ex-Catholics ought to recognize that.
I may think of some examples that we can use here as we go along.
Well, write them down as you go.
I will, and then I'll tear it up.
Ron, what are your thoughts?
Well, just like you, Jerry, I like to. I go back and do a little reading on history and so forth. I won't read all this, of course, but I found some interesting stuff, and the term actually went back in the 19th century.
Really?
However, in the 50s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, it was used extensively in the Communist Party by those young communists who felt that the old fogies were much too rigid and much too orthodox. They wanted to branch out a little bit more into more social things, and so the political correctness. Then, of course, it started in the universities, and it was considered by conservatives to be against the liberal place in the universities. Now, John, you and I went to school in the 50s, and I went to a small liberal arts school in Pennsylvania. There was no area of discussion that was forbidden. Discussed about everything, talk about everything. If you wanted to insult somebody, they had to defend themselves. You had to defend yourself. And it wasn't just rural small town Pennsylvania. We had folks from the more urban areas in Pennsylvania and throughout the country, in fact, and a number of international students. I first became rather disgruntled with the Israelis when I met a Palestinian Christian Arab who had been displaced from his home in Jerusalem by the Israelis. And he managed eventually to bring his entire family over and get them jobs at the college. Interesting guy, smart, intelligent, and didn't have a home anymore. So, is this Israeli, is this Zionist movement really valid? What's going on here? Right. That sort of thing. More recently, conservatives have picked it up and have become more politically correct. And I have a statistic here. Paul Krugman, in 2012, a liberal scholar, of course, wrote, "The big threat to our discourse is right-wing political correctness, which, unlike the liberal version, has lots of power and money behind it. And the goal is very much the kind of thing that Orwell tried to convey in his notion of newspeak, to make it impossible to talk and possibly even think about ideas that challenge the established order." That's opinion. In a 2015 Harris poll, it's found that, quote, "Republicans are almost twice as likely, 42% versus 23%, as Democrats to say that there are some books that should be banned completely. Republicans are also more likely to say that some video games, movies, and television programs should be banned." We had a case this year when Mike Pence was booed at a performance of Hamilton, and the president says, "Well, this ought to be a safe space. He ought to do that." Well, that's a reversal, isn't it? And I'll end my thought there with a couple of quotes. George Carlin said, "PC is fascism, pretending to be manners." I like that one. And John Cleese, he did a whole series, a whole monologue on political correctness and how bad he thought it was. He says, if people can't control their own emotions, then they have to try to control others' beliefs. So I think I'm not for political correctness in general. I want to be polite. I want to. It's has the commendable goal, and started as a commendable goal, to diffuse hate, racism, sexism, and all that sort of thing, and to try to use speech that is not pejorative, that is not prejudicial against any particular group, and as you say, a group who might be considered as a minority or on the other, someone who's not like you, and be that, and then to allow those folks who might otherwise be harmed by this a safe place to go, particularly it's come in the universities. And my understanding is that, and you see this in terms in the kind of protest going on in universities, where in particular a conservative speaker might come in and not be allowed to speak, or the university may say, well, we won't have them now because there's been so much against it. And there's a recent thing. Megyn Kelly is supposed to do an interview with Alex Jones. And there's a big protest starting now about let's talk to NBC. Let's not have that interview aired.
Because he's a what?
Alex Jones is
InfoWars,
a big conspiracy theorist. One of his theories is that the massacre in Newtown did not happen. It was a hoax.
He claims that they brought child actors to portray all those.
I happen to be acquainted with the person whose dear friend was a teacher there who was killed. So it's not a hoax. But it's that kind of thing. A couple of years ago at one of my high school reunions, we have a picnic every summer, and a friend showed up who I hadn't seen in many, many years. And he handed another friend and I, who is more liberal than I am, a CD. And he says, listen to this guy. This is really interesting. I take it home, and it's a whole series of lectures by Alex Jones. So I began listening to them, and I couldn't take it. So I threw the thing away. But that kind of thing is going on, and I think Alex Jones should be allowed to speak. He's a hate monger. He's out it for the money, I'm sure, but he should be heard.
On the same panel with Sanders, right? To the pro and the opposite ends. Yeah. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that out.
Is that tongue in cheek, John?
Well,
I'm not sure I'd put Alex Jones on the same.
I wouldn't.
No, he is so far
I wouldn't
right.
either. I was just trying to get Ronald.
Well, no, that's true. I mean, he's way too far right for my taste, for sure. But come on, let's listen to him. Let's refute him. Let's talk to him.
I would be interested in hearing that interview. I think.
Well, are they going to have it, or was it canceled?
It's still up in the air, as far as I know. It's still scheduled. I don't know when. I mean, it's happened already, and some little bits are starting to come out of what was said.
Okay, Patty, you're going to weigh in on this and agree with Ron that political correctness should be banished?
Well, not completely, no. Political correctness means a lot of things. It did start, I think, for the most part, where we became aware of the term was when we realized finally as a society, as we should have, that certain terms for different ethnicities, different groups, different cultures, different religions were improper, they were hurtful, and should not be used.
Well, I didn't mean to imply that I was against that part of it.
Right. It has expanded, though, to the point where whenever you disagree with someone, you're accused of being politically correct. I think we need to understand that there's a difference between politically correct and appropriate. There are many things that are totally inappropriate to say, and simply because someone calls you out on that, they're not trying to be politically correct. They're just being appropriate. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that I've heard recently as claims of political correctness are nothing more than someone saying, listen, it is not appropriate to use that type of language or that type of verbiage in a particular setting. You're not being politically correct. You're just being a civil human being. You know, I heard this on the campaign trail. Donald Trump seems to think that anytime someone calls him out for his speech that is out there, I'd like to say, or perhaps is inciting someone to, I hate to say incite to violence, but something that seems to occur there, that they're calling him out for not being appropriate. And then he claims, well, they're just trying to make me politically correct. And then there are those that have heard the safe spaces and the microaggressions, and they're fed up with that. And they hear him and they think, oh, that's right, you know, he's trying to get rid of political correctness. No, he's just being inappropriate. I mean, his recent one was, he had a tweet that said that he was talking about his executive order to limit the number of immigrants that came into the country from the various nations. And he said, we have to call it what it is, a travel ban. We can't be politically correct. Travel ban was considered to be a politically correct statement for a Muslim ban. So, you know, he's using what was considered a politically correct term to claim that others were forcing him to be politically correct, and he wasn't going to be. And it didn't make any sense to me. So, I think the sad part is we still now hear language that is not only inappropriate but politically incorrect because it is offensive and demeaning to various groups of people. But some people think that's okay now because there is this feeling that, oh, I'm just, I'm going against this politically correct thing, so I'm going to use this language. And we're taking a step backward, I think.
Do you think the term politically correct is a pejorative? I mean, it's an insult.
It's to that point where it is considered, where it is an insult. And so as soon as you say that, you really shouldn't say that, people think, oh, you're just trying to be politically incorrect, and you're the awful person.
Well, that's how it started, really, in the late 80s, 90s, in the universities, in the response to the liberal establishment in the universities as a pejorative term. And I think it still is used that way.
When I think about growing up and being taught manners by my parents and the nuns in our grade school and all of that, I think of that as being civil politeness.
Right.
Call it whatever you
with some degree of respect.
Call it whatever you want, but to say please and thank you and I'm sorry and to use titles. I mean, as a kid, you learn to say Mrs. So-and-so and Mr. So-and-so. You don't call them by the first name. I mean, it was, call it whatever you want, I suppose, but it's being polite. It's the civil thing to do.
And understanding what people expect. If you know that a term is offensive to someone, why do you continue to use it? I mean, I wouldn't look at your face and say, you're an idiot, because that would be offensive.
Well, it wouldn't be true either.
That's true. Well, that's probably true.
Well, we could argue about that.
There are opinions. No.
It's part of that being civil.
Hey, some of these terms are coming to me, John.
All right, let's hear them.
What did we formerly call somebody who was learning disabled?
Oh.
What did we call somebody?
Retarded.
What term did we use for somebody who was physically disabled?
Yeah.
What did
Cripple.
Right? What is the C in NAACP? That's the type of thing.
Yeah.
See, because I don't know if that term that we used for disabled or learning disabled became a negative, a pejorative term. That it was changed.
Some terms get picked
but I
up.
mean, those were widely used, and but somehow they turned. But again, then it's those types of things I think have been taken to the extreme.
But there are
Or
some
maybe
terms
it's
too.
just
Some terms too that get accepted by the folks that are being called. I can think of the terms geek and nerd, for example.
Right.
As a geek and a nerd, I'm happy to embrace the
Well, yeah.
To come
terminology.
compliments, though.
Yeah. Right.
I think that,
And among the black community, the N-word is used freely,
Exactly right. But
particularly among the coarser element.
right. Yeah.
I think about J. Patrick Moynihan. What's his first initial?
Patrick
Daniel.
Moynihan.
Huh?
Moynihan.
Daniel.
Daniel.
Daniel
Patrick
Daniel.
Moynihan. And he used an expression some time back called defining deviancy downward. And that what was deviant, what's deviant now was not. Get that right. I'll give an example. When I was in high school, there was a party, 1956, at Charlie Orth's house, and that the boys and girls were all there. And one of the guys let the F-bomb slip out. The next day, it was all over the school what this guy said in front of the girls. Mm-hmm. I mean, use the F-bomb. And I thought about that the other day. There was a woman, as a congresswoman, can't remember where she's from, but she was giving a speech.
I heard that.
And,
yes.
And she used the F-bomb, and then she said, well, I'm here in front of a bunch of young people, so I'm told that it's okay.
Yeah, well,
we define deviancy downward at big
Good
time.
heavens,
Well,
look at
and
Facebook.
yeah, and I think too that there's a theory there that there is only a certain band of accepted terms like that. And as the more that might be offensive to us become accepted or in that band, the ones that were not kind of move off of the accepted
During
list.
Vietnam, situations in the college where the National Guard or the local police were offensive against college students, it commented that here's these young co-eds leaning out the window shouting obscenities at the soldiers who more or less were generally from
Same
rural
generation.
neighborhoods,
They were-
non-sophisticated individuals, and they took great offense at it, even though they used the terms themselves, I'm sure.
Right.
Yes.
I want to read this and see what your reaction is. Political correctness is one of the brilliant tools that the American right developed in the mid-'80s as part of its demolition of American liberalism. What the sharpest thinkers on the American right saw quickly was that by declaring war on the cultural manifestations of liberalism, by leveling the charge of political correctness against its exponents, they could discredit the whole political project.
Yeah, I think that's
That's
accurate.
what you were saying. Yeah.
That's accurate. And as some of these statements went out, that's swinging around the other way now.
Right.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. In fact, I think it in itself is
I think that's accurate.
a brilliant comment. It is indeed something that was developed in the 80s. I mean, yes, the term can go back 100 years,
80s, 90s.
but in our modern usage, forgetting all about McCarthy, but in our modern usage, it is something that the right uses as a pejorative against things that are called for by the left. But the one thing I am so concerned about is the extremes to which this stuff goes, particularly when it comes to a bias toward a race or a religion or whatever, how we bend over backwards to not do that. We put ourselves sometimes at risk. And I wanted to give an example of American Airlines after 9/11. They were hypersensitive to anybody who might be a terrorist getting on an airplane. At the same time, the Department of Transportation was hypersensitive to discriminating against somebody based on ethnicity, religion,
The way
so
they
forth.
looked.
Profiling.
Yes, so they identified American Airlines as being a civil rights pariah whose discriminatory conduct would result in irreparable harm to the public if not stopped. Here's what they're talking about. In the last 4 months of 2001, American Airlines carried 23 million passengers. They asked 10 of them, which is 0.00004% of the total, not to board because they raised security concerns that could not be resolved in time for departure. For those 10 interventions, and an 11th in 2002, the Department of Transportation declared American Airlines to be a civil rights pariah. Now,
Who declared it?
the Department of Transportation.
I'm remembering a scene from the movie Airplane, a lovely spoof on all things social, where the security people are beating up an old lady while these heavily armed people are walking right by.
The one guy walking up with a wrench. Yeah.
I wonder, political correctness, you know, how much of it is euphemism to take the rough edges off of something. I mean, is that good? Is it? I don't know. It just seems so many times the terms that are used that we would consider politically correct kind of take the bite out of what something really is.
John says politeness, civility, or civility.
Yeah,
maybe.
And I think that we all need to be aware of what other people consider to be offensive. Now, you had mentioned the C in the NAACP.
Correct.
At one time, it was politically correct to refer to African Americans as colored people.
Right.
Then it was also at one time Negro was correct. Then Afro-American became the
civilized area, Black Power.
Then Black came along, and it became the proper, respectful thing to refer to an African American. And personally, that's where I draw the line. Say, I'm not changing anymore.
You know, I part of the problem with that is that the terms that were originally used were meant to be derisive.
Oh, yes.
And were horribly hateful. And if you look at the history on that evolvement, I think it is appropriate that the Black community should be able to choose what term they feel is appropriate.
Yeah, and they can change it as often as they want, I suppose. But no, it is important in a civil culture for us to recognize what people. I don't know why people want to be referred to as Asian rather than Oriental, but if they do, that's fine with me. I'll refer to them whatever way they want. That's only in the U.S., by the way.
I just rewatched the movie Blazing Saddles.
Oh, geez.
And at the end of that, they always want we'll take these, but we don't want the Irish.
Right. Okay, well, good quote to end things with. This is an interesting quote, and I can't even pronounce the guy's name who said it. Sometimes truths are habitual lies that we want to hear and are comfortable with. His last name was Ezekiel. Thanks, Zeke. No.